Our family seemed like the perfect portrait of happiness. Two hardworking parents, two children, and a dog named Max who loved to bark at squirrels. From the outside, everything appeared idyllic. Picture perfect. But behind that facade was a different story. One where I, Laurel, was always living in the shadows of my older brother, Lucas. We were just 2 years apart. But from the moment we were children, Lucas was the one who excelled at everything. The golden child, the one who could do no wrong. It didn't start out this way. Lucas and I used to be inseparable when we were younger, playing together all day and sharing secrets like best friends. But as we got older, things changed. Lucas was always a star athlete, the math genius, the charming, popular boy. And then there was me, Laurel, Lucas's sister. My achievements were always overshadowed by his successes. I first noticed a shift when I was around 10. It was a family dinner, and Lucas had just come home with a trophy from his basketball tournament. My parents could barely contain their excitement, showcasing the trophy on the mantle like it was the crown jewel of our family. I didn't mind at first, but when I tried to talk about my own accomplishment, a drawing I had selected for a school contest, my mother barely glanced at me, muttering something dismissive before turning back to Lucas. As time went on, the difference between how I was treated and how Lucas was treated became harder to ignore. Lucas would bring home an A on a test, and it felt like he had discovered the cure for cancer. Meanwhile, if I brought home the same grade, I'd get a distracted, "Good job." My small victories were never enough to earn the same praise as Lucas, and my failures, no matter how small, were met with disproportionate anger. But it was the way my parents seemed to always forgive him no matter what that truly hurt. When he broke a plate or got into trouble at school, it was always brushed aside with excuses. But when I made a mistake, even the smallest one, it was a big deal. It all came to a head one summer afternoon when I was 16. My mom asked Lucas and me to help with some cleaning, and as I picked up a beautiful ceramic vase that my grandmother had hand-painted years ago, I admired it for a moment. Lucas, who was joking around as usual, ran past me, knocking me into the vase. It crashed to the ground, breaking into pieces. I froze, panic setting in. But Lucas just shrugged and said it was an accident. Before I could even speak, my mother rushed in. She took one look at the shattered vase and exploded. "How could you be so careless?" she shouted at me, completely ignoring that it was Lucas who had knocked me into it. I tried to explain, but Lucas stood there, silent and avoiding my gaze. My father, as usual, intervened. "Stop blaming your brother for your mistakes, Laurel," he said, his voice cold. That was the moment I realized I would never be the golden child. The moment I knew my parents would always choose Lucas over me. The years that followed were marked by my constant efforts to prove myself, but my parents never seemed to notice. When it came time to choose a college, I had worked hard to secure a partial scholarship, but I still had to work part-time to cover my expenses. My parents made it clear that I was on my own. "It's your responsibility," they told me. But when Lucas, fresh off his freshman year of college, decided to transfer to a more expensive school, they did everything they could to help him out. I overheard them talking about how to take out loans for him, while I wondered why they had never offered me the same support. I felt like an afterthought in my own family. When I came home for a break during my first year of college, I found that my room had been converted into an office for Lucas. His sports equipment, his books, his things, all of it had been moved into what used to be my space. My mother casually said, "We thought you didn't need it anymore. Lucas uses it when he's here." I could barely contain my shock. My parents had made it clear there was no longer a place for me in their house, no place for me in their lives. That's when I knew I had to leave. I couldn't stay where I wasn't wanted. I packed my bags, said my goodbyes, and cut ties with my family for good. It was the hardest decision I'd ever made, but it was also the most freeing. Building a life from scratch was difficult. I barely had any money saved, and the partial scholarship didn't even cover half of my expenses. I worked 2 jobs, one at a coffee shop in the mornings and the other as an assistant in my university's library at night. The first few weeks were a blur of exhaustion and loneliness. I didn't hear from my parents once, but gradually I began to adjust. The work was hard, and the nights were long, but for the first time, I felt free. My first Christmas away from home was painful. I didn't want to admit to my friends that I had nowhere to go, so I pretended to be busy and spent the day in my tiny apartment, eating ramen and watching old movies. That night, I made a promise to myself. Someday, I would have a life where I wouldn't have to pretend to be okay. I wouldn't feel so alone. Despite everything, my grandfather, Joseph, remained a steady presence in my life. He lived on a ranch outside of Denver, and although we didn't see each other often, he wrote to me regularly. His letters were short but meaningful. One day, about a year after I left home, I received a letter from him that simply said, "I'm proud of you. If you need anything, don't hesitate to ask." It was the first time in a long time that someone in my family acknowledged and valued me, and that meant more than I could ever express. A year later, my grandfather invited me to visit him at the ranch. When I arrived, he told me he was getting older and had health problems. He had something important to discuss. To my surprise, he offered me the ranch and the small but successful carpentry business he had built from the ground up. At first, I was stunned. I had never considered myself a businesswoman, let alone someone who could take over such a legacy. But my grandfather, who had always believed in me, trusted me to continue his work. It felt like an honor, but also a huge responsibility. When word of my inheritance spread, my parents and Lucas tried to claim their stake in a ranch and business. They came up with excuses, pretending to care about the ranch that had never interested them. They wanted what my grandfather had built, and they wanted it for themselves. I couldn't believe the hypocrisy. The family that had ignored me for years, the ones who hadn't even bothered to visit my grandfather, suddenly care about the ranch? The situation quickly escalated. My parents, now desperate to get their hands on the ranch and the business, filed a lawsuit to challenge the validity of my grandfather's will. They claimed that he was too old to make such decisions, and that I had somehow manipulated him into excluding them. I was devastated by their betrayal, but I wasn't going to back down. I hired a lawyer and began preparing for the long, grueling legal battle. One Saturday, my parents, Lucas, and a few uncles showed up at the ranch, demanding that I hand over control of the business and the property. My mother pretended to be kind, but it was all a ruse. She made veiled threats, claiming that we were family and should share the inheritance. But I wasn't fooled. This wasn't about family. It was about greed. The argument lasted for hours. At one point, Lucas sneered at me, saying, "You think you're so special now, don't you?" His words cut deeper than I wanted to admit, but I refused to back down. I told them all to leave and promised them that I would take legal action if they didn't respect my boundaries. The lawsuit continued for months, dragging me through legal hoops and emotional turmoil. My family's greed didn't stop, but I remained resolute. I focused on the business, learning the ins and outs of carpentry and management. My grandfather had taught me well, and with each passing day, I felt more connected to the legacy he had entrusted to me. After the legal proceedings, Lucas reached out to me again, his tone more conciliatory. He claimed to have changed and wanted to reconcile, but I knew better. This wasn't about reconciliation. It was about getting what he thought was owed to him. I refused to be manipulated again. In the end, my grandfather's was upheld, and the lawsuit was dismissed. It was a legal victory, but it came at a great emotional cost. My family had shown their true colors, and while I had won, the damage had been done. Today, the business is thriving. I've continued to build on my grandfather's legacy, and although there are still times when I feel the weight of everything, I've learned to find peace in the work I do. I'm not looking for revenge or closure for my family. I'm focused on building my future, one step at a time. As the business grew, so did the weight of responsibility. Laurel found herself working longer hours, trying to manage both the carpentry business and the ranch. Her grandfather's health continued to decline, and the burden of his legacy was heavier than she had ever imagined. Every day felt like a delicate balance between honoring his wishes and maintaining her sanity. One day, Laura received a surprising offer from one of her grandfather's old employees. A man named Jack, who had worked with her grandfather for over a decade, came to her with an offer to help manage the business. Jack was older but wise, and his knowledge of the carpentry trade was unmatched. Laurel hesitated at first, unsure she was ready to trust anyone. But she realized that she couldn't do it all alone. Jack's offer marked the first step in finding a team she could trust. Laurel's family, particularly her parents and Lucas, weren't giving up on their legal battle. They continued to harass her with threatening phone calls, passive-aggressive social media posts, and even attempted to sabotage some of the business dealings. The constant barrage of stress took a toll on Laurel's mental health, and the tension between them was palpable. Laurel had cut ties, but they were relentless in trying to force their way back into her life. As Laurel struggled to balance the business, her grandfather's declining health, and the constant harassment from her family, an unexpected ally emerged. Sarah, a local businesswoman who had once been a customer of the carpentry business, offered to help. She had noticed Laurel's potential and wanted to see her succeed. Sarah became a trusted advisor and friend, offering guidance in managing the business side of things and providing emotional support when things got tough. The legal battle intensified as Laurel's family sought to find new ways to challenge the will. They hired a lawyer to dig into every detail of her grandfather's estate, hoping to find a loophole that would allow them to claim a portion of the business and the ranch. Laurel found herself spending more time in courtrooms and workshops, trying to defend what her grandfather had worked so hard to build. Laurel's grandfather's health continued to decline, and one day, he made a decision that left Laurel shaken. He asked her to take over full responsibility for the business and the ranch, knowing that he didn't have much time left. Despite her fear, Laurel agreed. She promised him she would continue the legacy he had created and do whatever it took to ensure his hard work didn't go to waste. But with that promise came the weight of the future, the legacy she was now fully responsible for. One fateful evening, as Laurel worked late into the night in the workshop, she received an unexpected visitor. Her mother. It had been years since they last spoke, but her mother had come to make one last plea. She claimed that she had changed, that the family wanted to reconcile. But Laurel knew better. The visit was another attempt to manipulate her into giving up her grandfather's legacy. Laurel rejected her mother's offer and made it clear that she would not give up the legacy her grandfather had entrusted to her. The confrontation left her shaken, but she knew she had made the right decision. Standing strong in the face of her family's manipulation, Laurel began to realize that she was no longer the person she had been. She was no longer the quiet, overlooked daughter. She was a businesswoman, a leader, and the future of the ranch and carpentry business. As the business grew, so did Laurel's responsibilities. She worked tirelessly to manage everything, but the strain began to show. Jack, her trusted employee, noticed the toll it was taking on her and encouraged her to delegate more. Yet, Laurel couldn't bring herself to let go. She was afraid that if she did, everything she had worked so hard for would crumble. She feared losing control of her grandfather's legacy. The success of the business wasn't without its challenges. One of the key clients Laurel had secured for a major project suddenly pulled out, leaving her with a financial hole to fill. The pressure mounted as bills began to pile up, and Laurel feared that everything she had built might collapse. But just when it seemed like all hope was lost, Sarah suggested a new marketing strategy to attract more clients. Laurel hesitated at first, but ultimately agreed, hoping it would work. Lucas, unable to accept his failure, launched a campaign against Laurel, publicly accusing her of exploiting their grandfather's legacy. He went so far as to claim that the ranch and business were being mismanaged. Laurel found herself fighting not only her family's legal claims, but also the media pressure Lucas created with his lies. The battle for her grandfather's legacy was no longer just about the business. It had become a personal war that threatened to destroy everything she had fought for. Despite the mounting pressure, Laurel found herself relying more on Jack and Sarah. They had become more than just colleagues. They had become her support system. Jack, with his years of experience, helped guide her through the complexities of the business world, while Sarah provided emotional support when the weight of the world seemed too heavy to bear. With their help, Laurel learned to trust others and accept that she didn't have to carry the burden alone. Any evening, Laurel received a letter from a distant relative. It was a simple note, but the contents were anything but. The letter revealed that Lucas had been secretly negotiating with a competing carpentry company, offering them insider information about the business in exchange for a lucrative deal. This revelation sent shockwaves through Laurel's already fragile world. She realized that Lucas had been sabotaging her from the inside, all for the sake of his own greed. Laurel decided to confront Lucas about his betrayal. It was a difficult decision, but she knew she couldn't let him continue to undermine everything she had worked for. The confrontation was intense, with Lucas trying to manipulate her once again. But Laurel stood her ground, exposing his lies and making it clear that she would no longer tolerate his behavior. It was a victory for her, but also a bitter reminder of how far her family had gone to destroy her. Lucas retaliated by turning the rest of the family against Laurel. He manipulated them into believing that she was unfit to carry on the family legacy. The tension reached a boiling point, and it seemed like Laurel might lose everything. But despite the emotional turmoil, Laurel held firm. She had come too far to let them take away what her grandfather had given her. She knew that the only way to move forward was to sever the toxic ties with her family for good. With her family's attempts to sabotage her business and personal life, Laurel decided to completely distance herself from them. She focused on the future, channeling her energy into expanding the business. She implemented new marketing strategies and invested in modern tools to streamline operations. Slowly but surely, the carpentry business began to thrive, attracting new clients and opportunities. Laurel was finally building something that was entirely her own, something that no one could take from her. One day, after a month of hard work, Laurel received an invitation to showcase her business at a prestigious industry event. This was a chance to put her grandfather's legacy in the spotlight and gain recognition for her work. It was a moment she had been waiting for, the moment that could change everything. At the event, Laurel stood proudly beside her grandfather's work, explaining the craftsmanship and dedication that went into each piece. The reception was overwhelmingly positive, and several high-profile clients expressed interest in her work. For the first time, Laurel realized just how far she had come. She was no longer the overlooked daughter. She was a respected businesswoman, recognized for her talents. After the showcase, a major investor approached Laurel with an offer to buy a stake in her business. The offer was tempting, but it also came with strings attached. Laurel had worked so hard to build everything from the ground up, and the idea of giving up control felt like a betrayal to her grandfather's memory. She would have to make a difficult decision. Laurel weighed the pros and cons of the offer. On one hand, it could provide the financial backing needed to expand the business and take it to the next level. On the other hand, it meant losing some control over her grandfather's legacy. After much consideration, she decided to decline the offer, choosing to stay true to the values her grandfather had instilled in her. The ongoing legal battle with her family finally came to a resolution. The court ruled in her favor, upholding her grandfather's will and ensuring that the business and the ranch remained in her hands. It was a hard-won victory, but it was a victory nonetheless. After the legal battle, Laurel knew that it was time to move forward with her life. She packed up the remnants of her family's legacy and set out on a new path, no longer weighed down by the toxicity of her past. Her grandfather's memory would live on, but Laurel had finally found the strength to leave her family behind and embrace the future she had built on her own terms. After the legal victory, the pressure didn't ease. Laurel expected to feel relief, but instead, she felt a weight press harder against her chest. She had won the battle for her grandfather's legacy, but the cost was high. Her family, particularly her mother and Lucas, had shown no signs of letting go. The tension with them continued to build, and Laurel feared that her past might always haunt her, no matter how much she had achieved. One afternoon, Laurel received an unexpected visit from a man named Nathaniel, a lawyer who had worked with her grandfather for years. Nathaniel brought with him a collection of old documents, letters, journals, and financial records that detailed the true extent of her grandfather's legacy and hidden assets. Among these papers was a note from her grandfather, hinting at something significant that he had wanted Laurel to uncover when the time was right. The mystery surrounding the documents ignited a new curiosity in Laurel, one that could change everything. Laurel pored over the documents late into the night, uncovering more about her grandfather's history and the challenges he had faced in building his business. It turned out that her grandfather had once been a key player in a larger network of carpenters, with significant investments in properties and businesses beyond what Laurel had known. There was a hidden side to her grandfather's empire, and the more she learned, the more she realized how much he had sacrificed to build it. This discovery opened new doors for her business, but also raised questions about how her family had been involved or not involved in his life. With the newly uncovered documents, Laurel had the chance to expand her business in ways she had never imagined. One of her grandfather's old partners had left her a portion of his estate, which included valuable properties in the city. Laurel was faced with an investment opportunity that could elevate her business to a new level. However, the deal came with strings attached. She had to act quickly and had to trust others in the process. Laurel had always done everything herself, but this time, she realized that trusting the right people might be the key to securing her future. Laurel struggled with the decision. While the financial opportunity could secure her future, she knew it would also require her to step out of her comfort zone and rely on people she didn't fully trust. Jack, her employee, had been advising her on the financial side of things, and Sarah had been instrumental in helping her manage the business. But the thought of giving up control, even a little, was daunting. The decision weighed heavily on her, and the stakes felt higher than ever. As the business began to grow, so did the pressure from Laurel's family. Lucas, feeling increasingly entitled, sent her a scathing message demanding that she divide the profits from the business and the ranch. He claimed that their grandfather's legacy was a family matter, and no matter what Laurel had done, they were entitled to a piece of it. But Laurel, having spent years fighting for her independence, stood firm in her decision. She was not going to let him, or her parents, take what she had worked so hard to build. The situation took a darker turn when Lucas reached out to some of the suppliers Laurel had been working with. He tried to convince them to drop her business and work with him instead. His tactics were underhanded, attempting to undermine her efforts and discredit her reputation. When Laurel discovered this, the betrayal cut deeper than anything he had done before. Her brother, whom she had once shared everything with, was now an adversary in a game she never wanted to play. In the wake of Lucas's betrayal, Laurel decided she had to take a stand. Not just for the business, but for herself. She hired a private investigator to gather evidence of Lucas's attempts to sabotage her. She confronted him with the evidence, and for the first time, she saw him visibly shaken. Laurel told him that she would no longer tolerate his manipulation. Their relationship had reached an irreversible breaking point, and she knew that the only way forward was to continue living her life without the toxic influence of her family. With Lucas out of the picture, Laurel was finally able to focus on the growth of her business. The legal battles were behind her, and she could see the fruits of her labor coming to life. The workshop expanded, new clients lined up, and her grandfather's legacy was thriving. But it wasn't just about the business anymore. It was about reclaiming her life, her worth, and her identity. She was no longer just a daughter of Claire and David or the sister of Lucas. She was Laurel, a woman who had fought for everything she had and had earned her place in the world. As Laurel stood on the porch of the ranch, looking out over the land her grandfather had worked so hard to build, she reflected on how far she had come. The journey had been long and filled with obstacles, but she had emerged stronger. Her grandfather's health was still fragile, but he was proud of her and the legacy she was continuing. Laurel had not only succeeded in the business world, but had also found peace within herself. As she turned back to the workshop, ready to take on the next challenge, she knew that no matter what came next, she was prepared. Her future was hers to create, and she would build it with the same strength and integrity that carried her through all the hardships.